The United States Senate chamber was buzzing with anticipation. The political atmosphere was charged, thick with tension, as senators prepared to debate one of the most significant pieces of legislation in recent memory, the Big Beautiful Bill. This bill, championed by President Donald Trump, was a sweeping legislative package designed to extend tax cuts, enhance border security, and reform welfare programs like Medicaid and SNAP. The bill had already passed the House of Representatives, but the Senate debate promised to be a battlefield, especially with its eye-popping price tag, an estimated $2.40 to $5.70 trillion added to the national debt. As senators gathered, the spotlight naturally fell on Kentucky's own Rand Paul. Known for his libertarian views and his fierce advocacy for fiscal responsibility, Paul had made it clear that he opposed the bill. To him, the bill's debt implications were a nightmare, and its cuts to Medicaid and SNAP programs, though welcome in his eyes, were not enough to justify the enormous spending increases embedded within. But this time, Rand Paul was preparing to do something different. Not content with just opposing the bill quietly, he had decided to take a public, confrontational stance against President Trump, who had aggressively pushed the bill as a cornerstone of his administration's domestic agenda. In the days leading up to the Senate debate, Paul hinted at what some called an intimidation tactic. The senator was set to confront President Trump directly, challenging him to defend the bill in a Senate session that would be broadcast live across the country. On the day of the debate, the tension was palpable. The Senate chamber was packed with reporters, political analysts, and eager citizens watching from home. Rand Paul took the floor with confidence, his piercing eyes fixed on President Trump, who was watching from the gallery, flanked by his closest advisors and loyalists. Paul began his remarks by acknowledging the president's ambition, calling the bill big and beautiful, but quickly turning the phrase into a weapon. "Mr. President," Paul said, "I must say your big beautiful bill may be big in size, but it's dangerously reckless. You talk about border security and tax cuts, yet you are willing to throw our children and grandchildren under a mountain of debt they will never escape." His voice rang clear across the chamber. "We cannot keep spending trillions of dollars without a plan to pay it back. This bill, as it stands, will hurt hardworking Americans in the long run." As Paul spoke, his challenge was clear. President Trump, a man not known for backing down, needed to respond, and fast. For a moment, silence enveloped the room. Then, with his trademark confidence and larger-than-life persona, President Trump rose from his seat. His face, usually composed, showed a flicker of surprise. Rand Paul's words were sharper and more direct than anyone had anticipated. With a voice steady and commanding, Trump responded, "Senator Paul, I appreciate your passion for fiscal responsibility. But this bill is about protecting our borders, supporting our families, and keeping more money in the pockets of American workers. Yes, it costs money, but the benefits far outweigh the risks. We are making America stronger and safer." Yet even as he spoke, it was clear this exchange was not going to end here. The next moments would define not only the fate of the bill but also the political relationship between Rand Paul and President Trump. Would Paul back down? Or was he prepared to double down and risk everything? Stay tuned for part 2, where the drama escalates as Rand Paul doubles down on his challenge and the political fireworks begin in earnest. The charged atmosphere in the Senate chamber seemed to thicken as Rand Paul, buoyed by his initial challenge, was determined not to back down. After President Trump's confident defense of the big beautiful bill, many expected the confrontation to simmer down, but Rand Paul was just getting started. With the eyes of the nation upon him, Paul leaned into his role as the principled defender of fiscal restraint. "Mr. President," he began, his voice firm and resolute, "I understand the need to secure our borders and put money back into the pockets of Americans. But how can we do that when we are ballooning our national debt beyond all reason? The Congressional Budget Office warns this bill will add as much as $5.7 trillion to our already staggering debt. Our children will pay for this recklessness." Paul's words echoed beyond the chamber, resonating deeply with Americans worried about the country's financial future. For years, Rand Paul had built a reputation as a steadfast critic of runaway spending, and tonight, he embodied that role perfectly. The tension between the two powerful figures was now palpable, and members of the Senate began to take sides, whispering and nodding as Paul laid bare his objections. Many conservatives were torn, supportive of the bill's border security and tax cuts, yet uneasy about the massive debt increase. President Trump, never one to be easily rattled, responded with characteristic bravado. "Senator Paul, you and I both want what's best for America," Trump said. But we must think bigger. This bill is an investment, one that will make our country safer, create jobs, and ensure that our tax policies favor the working class. Debt is important, but so is winning the future. At this point, President Trump leaned in, locking eyes with Paul as if daring him to continue the fight. And Rand Paul didn't flinch. "I respect your vision, Mr. President," Paul said, "but winning the future means fiscal discipline, not digging a deeper hole. You say it's an investment, but at what cost? The cuts to Medicaid and SNAP, while necessary, don't offset the massive spending elsewhere. We risk the economic stability that generations have fought for." The gallery watched in awe as this rare confrontation unfolded. In a political climate often marked by polite disagreements and backroom negotiations, the blunt exchange felt raw, real, and urgent. Yet, even as the verbal sparring continued, Rand Paul's tone shifted subtly. He wasn't just opposing the bill, he was challenging President Trump personally. The senator's words carried a hint of warning, a suggestion that if Trump pushed too hard, he might lose critical support. "Mr. President," Paul said quietly but pointedly, "I urge you to reconsider parts of this bill. The American people expect leadership that safeguards their future, not endangers it." For a few seconds, silence filled the chamber again. But this time it was heavy with anticipation. President Trump's jaw tightened, and those watching knew the president's next move would be crucial. Then, unexpectedly, Trump broke into a broad smile, almost dismissive. "Senator, your concerns are noted," he said. "But I didn't come this far by second-guessing. The big beautiful bill will pass, and America will be better for it." That moment, the dismissive smile and firm declaration, would be the last straw for Rand Paul. With a sharp intake of breath, Paul realized that his challenge had perhaps gone further than he intended. The room seemed to tilt toward Trump's camp, and whispers of "Paul overplayed it" rippled through the Senate. In the tension-filled seconds that followed, Paul's initial confidence began to waver. He had tried to intimidate President Trump, to push him to reconsider the bill's excesses. But instead, he had provoked a leader known for his resilience and unyielding will. Would Rand Paul regret his bold move? The Senate debate was far from over, and the consequences of this confrontation were just beginning to unfold. As the Senate debate raged on, Rand Paul found himself grappling with the immediate fallout of his bold confrontation with President Trump. What had begun as a confident, principled stance against the big, beautiful bill was quickly morphing into a political headache. Almost immediately, whispers circulated through the Senate hallways. Some colleagues admired Paul's courage, while others privately shook their heads, convinced he had miscalculated by taking on the president so directly in such a high-stakes moment. The media, of course, was relentless. Headlines splashed across the nation, framing the story as a dramatic showdown. "Rand Paul challenges Trump, regrets seconds later," one tabloid blared. Political commentators debated endlessly over whether Paul's opposition was a bold act of principle or an unnecessary political gamble that risked alienating crucial allies. Back in his office, Paul sat alone, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. His advisors had warned him to tread carefully, but the senator had felt compelled to stand firm. Now, watching the reactions unfold, doubt began creeping in. He realized that the big, beautiful bill was more than just a policy proposal. It was a centerpiece of President Trump's agenda, a symbol of his leadership and vision for America's future. By directly challenging Trump on this bill, Paul had entered into a battle where losing was not an option for the president. Yet, what disturbed Paul the most wasn't the political backlash. It was the knowledge that, despite the bill's flaws, its core components, extending tax cuts, boosting border security, and cutting Medicaid and SNAP, aligned with many conservative values. He risked alienating voters who supported these elements, even if they shared his concern about the national debt. Paul's regret deepened when members of his own party privately cautioned him. Some said he had crossed a line, others warned that the president's supporters might see his opposition as disloyal. And with the bill set to face a critical vote soon, Paul worried that his actions might diminish his influence when it mattered most. Meanwhile, President Trump seemed unfazed by the confrontation. His team doubled down on promoting the big, beautiful bill as a victory for American families and national security. The president's rallies echoed with chants of support for the bill, painting Rand Paul's opposition as out of touch with mainstream Republican priorities. Despite this, Rand Paul remained committed to his principles. He scheduled meetings with fellow senators, trying to build a coalition that could amend the bill to address the debt concerns. But the reality was harsh. Many senators preferred to support the president's vision without delay. Then, just as the Senate prepared for the crucial vote, a surprising development unfolded. In a rare moment of candor during a closed-door meeting, Paul expressed to close allies his own doubts about whether his confrontation with Trump had been worth it. "I wanted to make a stand," Paul confessed. "But I underestimated how personal this bill is to the president. Now, I worry we're all paying the price." This moment marked a turning point. The senator who had once tried to intimidate the president over the big beautiful bill now found himself navigating the delicate balance between principle and pragmatism, a challenge familiar to many in Washington but no less painful. As the vote drew near, Paul faced a critical choice: continue his opposition and risk political isolation, or seek compromise to preserve his influence and advance fiscal responsibility in more measured ways. As the clock ticked toward the decisive Senate vote on the big beautiful bill, Rand Paul found himself at a crossroads. The public showdown with President Trump had sent ripples throughout Washington, but the legislative process demanded more than just fiery speeches and headlines. It required negotiation, compromise, and strategic calculation. Paul knew that the bill, with its mix of tax cuts, border security funding, and Medicaid/SNAP cuts, had significant support. The debate wasn't merely about ideology anymore. It was about political survival, the future direction of the Republican Party, and the fate of the American people. Behind closed doors, Paul's team worked tirelessly to identify potential amendments that could address the ballooning national debt without undermining the bill's core objectives. The senator was especially focused on tempering the spending increases that threatened to push the debt to unprecedented levels. But the political reality was sobering. President Trump's inner circle was unwavering in their support for the bill's current form. They viewed any significant changes as a threat to the administration's agenda and the promise of a stronger America. In a pivotal private meeting, Paul met with President Trump and key White House advisors. The atmosphere was tense, with both men recognizing the stakes. "Rand," Trump began, "I know you're concerned about the debt. But this bill is about winning the border, winning jobs, and making America great again. We can't afford delays or half measures." Paul, respectful but resolute, responded, "Mr. President, I share your vision for a safer, more prosperous America. But we can't ignore the price tag. The debt will cripple future growth. We need safeguards, mechanisms to ensure fiscal responsibility." For several minutes, the conversation teetered between confrontation and collaboration. Finally, Trump surprised those in the room by softening his tone. "Maybe we can look at targeted amendments," Trump said. "But the bill's backbone stays intact." This moment marked a subtle shift in the dynamic. While Trump remained the dominant force, Paul had earned a seat at the table, a chance to influence the bill's final shape. Over the next days, Paul worked alongside moderate Republicans and some Democrats to craft amendments that would introduce spending caps and periodic reviews of the bill's fiscal impact. The effort was a delicate dance, balancing policy goals and political realities. The public watched closely as Senate debates unfolded, with televised sessions revealing both the sharp disagreements and moments of unexpected cooperation. Paul's voice was prominent, advocating for fiscal discipline without dismissing the bill's intent. Though some critics accused him of wavering, others praised Paul for moving from confrontation to constructive engagement. His initial attempt to intimidate the president had given way to a mature approach aimed at protecting America's economic future. Meanwhile, President Trump continued to rally support, emphasizing the bill's benefits while acknowledging the need for responsible oversight, a nod, perhaps, to Paul's influence. As the final vote approached, the Senate seemed poised to pass a version of the big beautiful bill that incorporated key amendments addressing debt concerns, thanks in large part to Rand Paul's efforts. The senator himself reflected on the journey from fiery challenger to pragmatic negotiator with a mixture of relief and resolve. He understood that politics often required compromises but remained committed to the principles that had driven him from the start. The day of the final Senate vote on the big beautiful bill arrived with the nation watching closely. The months-long battle between fiscal hawks and the administration's supporters had come to a head, with Rand Paul playing a pivotal role in shaping the bill's final form. The chamber was packed, the air thick with anticipation and the weight of history. President Trump sat confidently in the gallery, flanked by his closest advisors and a team of supporters eager for the legislative victory. Rand Paul took the floor one last time before the vote. His speech was measured but passionate, a clear reflection of his journey through this political storm. "Today, we decide not just on a bill, but on the future of our country's economic health," he said. The big beautiful bill is far from perfect, but the amendments we fought for will help ensure that we protect our children from crushing debt while investing in America's security and prosperity. Paul's words earned nods and murmurs of approval across the chamber. Even some of his earlier critics acknowledged the senator's efforts to bring balance to a contentious debate. When the vote was called, the bill passed by a narrow margin, reflecting the deep divisions but also the compromises that had been struck. The amended Big Beautiful Bill would extend tax cuts, strengthen border security, and implement cuts to Medicaid and SNAP, all while introducing new fiscal safeguards to monitor the rising debt. In the aftermath, Rand Paul's initial attempt to intimidate President Trump over the bill became a defining moment in his career. Political analysts debated the episode for weeks, highlighting it as a rare example of a senator standing up to a sitting president and then adapting to work with him. Paul himself reflected on the experience with a mixture of humility and pride. "I challenged the president because I care about the long-term health of our country," he said in a later interview. "Politics is about standing up for what you believe in, but it's also about knowing when to work together for the greater good." President Trump, too, acknowledged Paul's role. "Rand was tough, but fair," Trump remarked in a press briefing. "We disagreed, but in the end, we found common ground to keep America moving forward." The Big Beautiful Bill's passage marked a new chapter in American politics, one where bold challenges and spirited debate could coexist with pragmatic governance. For Rand Paul, the episode underscored a vital lesson. True leadership requires courage, conviction, and the wisdom to know when to stand firm and when to compromise. And for the American people, it was a reminder that even the most polarizing issues could be resolved through debate, respect, and the relentless pursuit of a better future.